Anyway, thank you all. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words, and it's about time.
U.S. President Joe Biden began his first joint address to Congress by recognizing a historic moment: two women sitting behind him as successor to the office of the presidency, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and Vice President Kamala Harris. As a tradition, after the first 100 days in office, the United States president speaks to the nation during an address to Congress. The question is, what changes has the United States government made under the Biden administration? And what do they mean for the continent of Africa? Hello, I am Orion Itangishaka, and this is Our Voices. When the United States President Joe Biden took oath on January 20th, he assumed the responsibility for a set of unprecedented challenges, ranging from a global pandemic, an economic crisis, and a nation reeling from political and racial divisions. Now, as he reaches the milestone of 100 days in office, he is unveiling a range of accomplishments. Have they made any impacts on the African continent thus far? VOA's Anita Pab reports from Johannesburg.
U.S. President Joe Biden has focused most of his energy in his first 100 days in office on taming the pandemic on home soil. In this short, frantic period, though, he has made a few important gestures that have been welcomed in Africa. On his first day in office, he halted the U.S. plan to exit the World Health Organization. Biden's reversal of predecessor Donald Trump's controversial decision to withdraw from the global body was greeted with near universal approval, especially from African health experts, who said this could portend a more equitable world order. Biden also pledged an additional $2 billion to the COVAX facility, which aims to provide equitable vaccine access to poorer nations. And then, on day 90, April 20th, he spoke words that echoed across the ocean.
We can't leave this moment or look away thinking our work is done. We have to look at it, we have to look as we did for those 9 minutes and 29 seconds. We have to listen. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Those are George Floyd's last words. We can't let those words die with him. We have to keep hearing those words.
George Floyd, an African American, was born in Houston and murdered in Minneapolis. But the African continent watched keenly as a jury handed a guilty verdict to his killer, ex-policeman Derek Chauvin. Floyd's slow suffocation under Chauvin's knee, which led to his death, was a linchpin for protests and calls for police reform in the United States. African analysts such as Asanda Ngoasheng, a Cape Town-based diversity trainer and gender and race scholar, welcomed Biden's admission that the U.S. has a racial justice problem. South Africa is also struggling to overcome its own racial justice issues after centuries of colonialism and the brutal, racist apartheid regime. She also said Vice President Kamala Harris's status as a powerful black female leader lends weight to Biden's desire to address racial justice, but said she wants to see more from the administration and from American institutions.
We praise Kamala, and I think it's great that we praise her, but people of color in institutionally racist institutions very rarely are able to make any change. And so unless and until we deal with the systems and the structures that keep prejudice in place, we are not going to see many changes in the United States and globally. And so yay and great for America and Biden, but can we please talk about the institutional change that they are going to make?
Johannesburg-based commentator Brooks Spector said that while Biden hasn't made any big changes to Africa policy, the fact that he isn't making radical, impulsive changes, as critics accuse Trump of doing, is a welcome change in itself. Spector recommends that Biden work to strengthen and maintain the African Growth and Opportunities Act, a U.S. trade program.
Much of what has to happen is going to be demonstrated by doing things on the ground in a slow, steady, consistent pattern rather than these hectic policy changes of chopping and changing. If you want to demonstrate your support for economic growth on the continent, then you carry out the policies that encourage economic growth.
Spector, who served as an American diplomat overseas for several decades, says time will tell on Biden's impact on Africa. Presidential legacies, he said, are built over years, not days, even 100 of them. Anita Powell, VOA News, Johannesburg.
Thanks, Anita, for that report. Now, for a discussion on more of the Biden administration and its policy towards Africa, I'm joined by our Voice colleague, Dimiake Myakalele, and Maria Byrd, Nigeria's Channel TV's Washington correspondent. Hello, ladies.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hi, Ariane. Thank you very much for having me as well.
All right, ladies, let's get right into the conversation. I think that many of the diaspora members who voted for President Biden had the issue of immigration as their driving motive because of their families. Former President Trump, who was looking at getting the cream of the crop from people of other nations, meaning welcoming only those who would contribute to the U.S. in the way he saw it. In that quest, he enacted several travel restrictions, visa bans, and also we saw a clogged green card processing systems. We can say that things are a bit smoother for immigrants and even for Africans. Now, perhaps some African countries also will look forward to working with the new administrations in many sectors because of that. Maria, what do you think?
Ariane, if you remember during the Trump administration, you had some, specifically Nigerians, but Africans as a whole, that were in support of President Trump. But when the travel ban was brought forth, especially Nigerians were extremely surprised and taken back because you said the cream of the crop. And many Nigerians either come to the US already with education, with financial support, or they come here looking for and seeking education and contribute greatly to the economy of the US. And so that was definitely a major concern, I think a setback for many Nigerians' support of President Trump. Now, when President Biden was able to bring forth and to lift that travel ban, I think those who are a little bit questioning whether or not they would have support from his administration were very surprised. And I think now we really do have many Africans and Nigerians as a whole that are hopeful for the future policies for the continent.
Right. We see a lot of Africans and African Americans in his new administrations, also Nigerians.
Yes, that's true. We exactly have, the Nigerians that are right there in the administration. The Deputy Secretary for Treasury is of Nigerian descent. We also know that the Biden administration, unlike the previous administration, supported the WTO general, the first Nigerian woman to serve in that role. And so we are looking forward, I think, as a whole for the future, and Nigerians especially are looking forward to the future and the policies and the support that we're going to see from the United States.
That's precise. That's precise. We also will hear more from another Nigerian Deputy Assistant Secretary Cook, whom we will hear from later on in the show. But what I really see as a challenge in this new administration will be working with Africa, and when it comes to how much they will actually decide to invest there. We know that Russia and China are aggressively investing there at the moment. You remember just 2 years ago, Russia had its first ever Africa Summit in Sochi in 2019. Now, China, we already know, has railroad, robust infrastructure, and many things around the continent, especially in key countries such as Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and so forth. Now, we know that each president in the past have had signature initiatives and major focus areas in Africa. So I look forward to seeing where this new administration will channel its resources. The Trump administration's legislation known as the Build Act came as a signature initiative to prosper Africa. It was designed to assist U.S. companies seeking to do business in Africa. But that investment, which was about $60 billion, was the same match that China used just in railroad projects, which African presidents were so desperately needing. And we can actually see those investments. So I'm curious to see exactly the initiative that the President Biden will focus on when it comes to Africa, when Russia and China are already aggressively spending billions of dollars on the continent. What do you think, Ndimi?
Definitely, Ariane. You know what they say, right? Proof is in the pudding, or put your money where your mouth is. So there's a lot of interest in seeing exactly what President Biden will do for Africa. Well, as a start, I think many are applauding the fact that he did show up for the 34th summit of the African Union, where he said that the United States is ready to be a partner for Africa, which I think resonated very well with a lot of African leaders because of some of the tensions, I guess. Coincidentally, though, even though President Trump did have a summit here in Washington where he invited several heads of state to discuss possibilities and opportunities in Africa, it derailed after it leaked that he had identified African countries, some of them as a word I guess I'm not allowed to use on this platform. But there's clearly an interest in seeing what and how will the United States turn around and now start showing that partnership that President Biden spoke about. To the point that you raised earlier about the initiatives or the signature initiatives that some of the predecessors to Biden had mentioned, you have AGOA, of course, under President Bill Clinton. You have PEPFAR, which is still ongoing, which was started off by President Bush, former President Bush. And then, of course, President Barack Obama came up with Power Africa, which was supposed to help, really boost the country's infrastructure. And then, of course, the infamous YALI for the young entrepreneurs and the Young African Leaders Initiative. So the question now for Biden would be, what signature initiative will he launch that will literally solidify his administration's commitment to rebuilding Africa? And then, of course, the Biden administration comes into office at a time when there's a lot of conflict in Africa. Where you're talking about the war in northern Mozambique, you're talking about what's happening in the northern part of Tigray in Ethiopia, rather in the northern part of Ethiopia in Tigray. So there's a lot of interest in seeing exactly what will happen under this Biden administration. Of course, the Biden administration has picked a special envoy to pay special attention to the Horn of Africa nation, Mr. Jeffrey Feltman. So many are seeing positives, but there's a lot of questions still about, of course, this is just 100 days. What would be the next 4 years really mean for Africa in terms of the Biden administration?
Demi makes some great points. And, as you mentioned the Africa Union, it is very key that the U.S. finds a way for partnership. And as you talked about the 34th Africa Union Summit and President Biden's push toward partnership, that is going to be key. But it's going to be really important for him to show that he is supporting the Africa Continental Trade Agreement. And if he shows that support, I think that Africa will begin to believe that the U.S. is truly interested in partnership.
Thank you so much, ladies. We have to end it right there. I'd like to thank Maria Byrd of Channels TV for joining us once again. We hope to have you back soon on the program. We have to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll hear from the newly appointed U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Akuna Cook. That's coming up next. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're with Our Voices. Now, I spoke to the newly appointed Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs in the current administration, Akuna Cook. Ms. Cook's foreign service assignments include service overseas in China, South Africa, and Iraq, and several years here in Washington serving in the Africa Bureau in various roles. She joins us from Skype as I ask her first if there was a U.S. Africa policy in this administration and what has been the major focus areas in the first 100 days.
The Biden-Harris administration has really been focused on addressing several crises which have come to the forefront over the past year. We are facing one of the worst health crises since in over 100 years. We're facing worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and the greatest threat to our democracy since the Civil War. And on top of that, we're looking at a climate crisis that is threatening this generation and future generations. And on top of that, a racial justice crisis that has been really circulating and bubbling through this country for centuries. And so as we think about our foreign policy in Africa, but in general, it's this recognition that addressing these challenges is really going to require partnerships and doing it in an alliance with other countries. We see Africa as a continent full of opportunity and as a critical partner on so many of these other issues. And so as we think about where we've been engaged over the first 100 days, it is on partnering with African countries to address some of these challenges.
What are some of the projects or activities that are being pursued at the moment?
Addressing this climate crisis is top of mind for this administration. And so you saw that with re-entering the Paris Climate Agreement and with the summit, the climate summit that the president just hosted April 22nd to the 23rd, which featured a number of African countries participating. We see climate as an area where the U.S. and Africa must cooperate because Africa will be greatly impacted by the effects of climate change. And so we see African countries as critical partners in addressing that challenge. We know that the demographics of the continent are such that it is young, vibrant, and future-oriented. And so when we think about coming out of this economic crisis and thinking about partnerships going into the future, we know that Africa and Africans have to be a part of that equation. And so really thinking about how we make a more robust economic partnerships and engaged private sector here in the United States, including the diaspora.
Mm-hmm. Now let's touch a little bit on COVID. What are some of the current U.S. engagement or future plans with Africa in terms of COVID relief?
The bottom line is that we cannot stop this pandemic without ending it everywhere. And that, of course, includes Africa. That is why the United States has been the largest contributor to COVAX, with a $2 billion commitment so far, pledge in addition to a $2 billion that has been contributed so far. In addition to that, we're supporting the Africa CDC because we don't want to just respond to this pandemic. We want to make sure that we're preventing future pandemics. And the United States has been a long-term partner on health in Africa. We are building this response to COVID on top of infrastructure that the United States has helped to build in Africa through partnership on PEPFAR, malaria, and responses to Ebola. And so we're pretty confident that as we build back better out of this pandemic, that Africa will also be in a better situation to respond to future pandemics.
Now, as a daughter of a Nigerian American, what would you like to see the U.S. work with Nigeria on politically, economically, or in the health sector?
Well, my parents immigrated to the United States as students from Nigeria in the 1970s. And that was an investment that the Nigerian government was able to pour into them at that time. One of the things that I'm really excited to see about the United States is that the President Biden, is thinking about making the same kinds of investments into American young people, including Black, brown kids that may not have had these investments in the past. And so as I think about how we partner and work with countries like Nigeria, I think it is by continuing to lead by example. We need to invest in our young people. We need to make sure that they are prepared for the future of work, which has arrived. And we also need to make sure that we are shoring up our democracy. Obviously, we have many challenges that we're facing here in the United States, as are countries like Nigeria. And I think that part of the future that we see and that I'm excited about is the opportunity to partner with countries like Nigeria on building a stronger, more democratic and prosperous future.
Thank you, Ariane. What a great insights from Deputy Assistant Secretary Cook. Now, I also had a chance to speak with White House correspondent for VOA, Patsy Widakuswara, about President Biden's 100 days in office, his address before the Joint Congress, his commitment to ensuring that Africa receives the vaccines that it needs, and also how his administration is different from that of his predecessor, Donald Trump.
Under the Biden administration, the focus has been on vaccinating Americans first. And as a result, even though The US says that they want to help other countries. They support UN initiatives such as COVAX. This is the mechanism for vaccine sharing and ensuring lower and middle income countries have access to the vaccines. The US has sponsored or has pledged up to $4 billion for that mechanism, as well as donating vaccine supplies such as AstraZeneca, 60 million doses. But the US is still being accused of hoarding all these vaccines and sitting on top of hundreds of millions of doses of vaccines, more than enough to vaccinate all Americans. And the reason why the Biden administration is doing this is because they want to be sure that they are oversupplied and overprepared in dealing with the pandemic when there are variants, and they want to know which vaccine is best to vaccinate children. The Biden administration announced that they will support what is called the TRIPS waiver. This is a proposal by South Africa as well as India in November at the World Trade Organization to get countries to agree to waive the intellectual property rights or patent rights for vaccines, not just vaccines, actually treatments, diagnostics, everything that has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. The Biden administration has agreed and has said that the US supports this waiver, which means a lot of things, including that countries can start developing their own generic versions of vaccines without fear of being sued by these major pharmaceutical companies who owns the so-called recipes for these vaccines.
What is the Biden administration's policy and strategy on Africa? Many are very curious about that.
Number one, wants to focus on trade and investment, and also in terms of promoting peace and security as well as human rights. And the other thing that the administration has been saying is that they want to restart a relationship with the African continent on a place of mutual respect.
What about under President Biden? How would you describe the Biden administration's policy toward China, and what is the objective there?
In confronting China, the Biden administration wants to do it multilaterally, wants to do it by kind of ganging up together with other countries, whether it's countries of the Quad, Japan, Australia, and India, as well as through other multilateral organizations, including the African Union. There is another major international partner other than China, and that is the US, and that's the goal for the Biden administration.
I want to turn to domestic issues. During these 100 days, what has President Biden revealed about his strategy for the rest of his term?
The biggest focus has been, of course, the vaccination campaign. More than 100 million Americans have been fully vaccinated. This is really a massive achievement from the Biden administration. And then turning the economy around. We know that the first quarter of 2021, the U.S. economy grew by 6.4%. That is a very encouraging number. So that's kind of like the first triage, right? The first 100 days. And then now next, we start to see these like big picture goals from the administration. Number one is infrastructure. Number two is education and also family care. So this is something that we're starting to see emerge from the Biden administration, is trying to unify the country, not in terms of rhetoric, not in terms of trying to get everybody to be on the same ideological plane, but to get everybody on board in terms of real policies.
In his address before the Joint Congress recently, President Biden spoke about putting America first. Can you elaborate on that, in the context under which he said it? Obviously, that was something that President Trump had also said.
This is very apparent in issues such as vaccination and issues such as rebuilding the American economy by having these kind of protectionist trade policies, buy American policies, very nationalistic in some sense. So that is the breakdown in terms of putting America first, getting America back to work, recover from the pandemic. And that has been the goal, the stated goal from the Biden administration. And as we can see, it will continue to do so.
There must be such a difference between working currently under the Biden administration as it was working under former President Trump. Can you share any details?
I think the biggest difference for me is that under the Biden administration, there's a lot more organization. I know exactly what's going to happen next week. I know exactly his detailed guidance from the day before. And so I can plan my day, I can plan my week, and there's not really much surprises, right? And of course, there's like once in a while things that we didn't realize was going to come out today. It comes out today. But for most of the time, we know what's going to happen. Now, that's very different than President Trump, when, I can spend 2 days working on a story and then it gets thrown out because of a 2 a.m. tweet. Now, that doesn't happen anymore. And for that, I'm actually grateful.
When we come back, we're going to introduce you to an amazing young woman from Senegal in our Women to Watch segment. Stay with us.
We're bringing women's voices to the conversation, and more than that, we're building a community of inclusion and empowerment.
Here in Kinshasa, campaigns to raise awareness against the spread of coronavirus are common, but getting that information to people who have no access to water, electricity, or money can be a challenge.
When these protests are happening, does it turn around into policy?
Our kids are raped every single day.
This movement got the government to listen. It really was powerful because it showed what is possible when men and women band together and say enough is enough.
Hello everyone, welcome to Women to Watch segment. The woman we are featuring today is a politician, civil servant, and an author. Meet Ambassador Rama Yade. She was recently appointed as Africa Director at the Atlantic Council. As one of the most popular politicians in France, Ambassador Yade was the first woman of African descent to become a member of the French cabinet. Born and raised in Senegal, Yade moved to France at the age of 11. In 2007, at the age of 30, she was appointed France's Assistant Secretary of State in charge of foreign affairs and human rights. 3 years later, she became French sports minister. After losing her ministerial position during a cabinet reshuffle, Yade remained a powerful woman in France politics. She was later appointed as France's ambassador to UNESCO in 2010. Yade says this is the role that helped her develop an expertise and deep interest in youth issues and children's rights. According to the Atlantic Council, Ambassador Yade used her previous positions to advance human dignity and rights in Africa. She worked on a wide range of issues, from women's rights to children's rights, from refugee protection to freedom of expression. Not only that, Yade is also a civil servant, an author of several books, and a teacher at the University of Morocco, where she teaches a course titled Africa at the Center of the World. Ambassador Yade says she is going to use her new role as Africa Director for the Atlantic Council as an opportunity not only to change Africa's narrative, but also to change the rules to allow a great prosperity.
Thanks, Imenyesh. And that's where we end our show this week. I'm Oriani Tangishaka. Thanks, my colleague Dimiake Miakelele and Maria Byrd. And on behalf of everyone on our voices and at the Voice of America, thanks for watching. Good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.